All right, three, two, one. And so you're saying you went from, you graduated with a philosophy degree and, decided, hey, you know what?
Yeah, so I graduated and then I worked for a year in a role at the school that was basic.
Hi, folks. Thomas Hinton here with another episode of Big Data, Big Questions. This is continuation of our career series. So today we've got a friend of mine, Fernando Medina Corey. He's going to talk about his role right now as lead cloud architect, and he's also going to tell us how he got into data engineering. So some really cool stuff. I don't want to spoil it because I didn't even realize some of the background that he had and how he got his first role as data engineering. So it's going to be an amazing course. I keep calling this a course. It's going to be an amazing interview, and I'd love for you to tune in. If this is your first time, make sure, if this is something you like, make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode of Big Data, Big Questions. And then without further ado, Fernando, who is also a Pluralsight author, right? What a coincidence. So enjoy this interview. All right, three, two, one. Hi, folks. Welcome back to Big Data, Big Questions. As promised, we have Fernando, a friend of mine. Fernando, how about you introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi, everyone. My name is Fernando Medina Corey, and right now I'm working as a lead cloud architect at Wittekio, but I've also done a lot of other work. Thomas and I have worked in the past, made courses at similar places. I've worked at Pluralsight, making a lot of content on AWS and serverless, some big data related stuff, but not quite as much as you have, Thomas.
Yeah, no, I think, Fernando's being modest here. He's got a ton of courses out there. So make sure you check those out. And we'll make sure that we link them here in the bio. So yeah, we're
Sure.
Pluralsight, and we actually met at a different place too. So it's good to reconnect, Fernando. And I'm excited to have you on. I mean, we have a lot of questions. I know you and I have kind of went through a couple here, but let's see how it's going. So kind of walk me in a little bit. Tell me, what's your background, right? So I know your background, but let's tell the folks, how did you get started? How did you get started in even IT and technology? What is that, something you've always wanted to do?
Yeah, good question. Well, actually, my degree from undergraduate is philosophy and politics, but I did
Makes
some tech.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah, easy transition, right? But I did some technology kind of on my own way back when in college, when I was just trying to automate a few things that I was doing then, and eventually kind of transitioned from kind of more of like a tech support IT role at the school that I'd worked at for a year into a startup in Philly. And that was another pretty much just support IT sort of basic role, where eventually I had some changes to learn the stacks that they were working with, and actually started working as a data engineer there after about a year and a half. My kind of migrated into that. So I did get my start kind of in that place, learning a lot of SQL, working with some Python, getting data plumbing in place to move things into, at the time, Redshift data warehouse, moving things around with Lambda and some serverless technologies. And then from there, I kind of started making courses, started working in a few different places, got more into serverless, and kept going that direction.
So I did not know political science and philosophy major, and I think this is important because a lot of the questions that I've gotten over the years is, "Hey Thomas, want to be a data engineer, want to be a data scientist, want to be software engineer,"
Mm-hmm.
and it's what degree? It's we almost get paralysis analysis over if I don't choose the right degree, I'll never get there. And so you're saying you went from you graduated with a philosophy degree and, decided, hey, you know what, working tech support at school, and you kind of transition. How long did it take you to make that transition? Did you say, was that a year to 2 years before you were
Yeah, good
employed at a
question.
startup?
Yeah, so I graduated and then I worked for a year in a role at the school that was basically kind of like an IT support role for one of the offices there. And after a year of doing that, I got a job in Philadelphia as a support engineer for a startup called Curelate. I think they're still around, but it's been a few years since I've checked in on them. And that role, I was in that role for like a year and a half, I think. And while I was doing that, it was a lot of trying to learn things about AWS, trying to learn things about SQL, more of the data warehousing that the company was doing. And when they brought on a full-time data scientist at the time who was leading their kind of data initiatives, I tried working a little more closely with him so I could get more experience in that area. And eventually, when that team grew a little bit, I was one of the first people to move over there and start helping manage a lot of the data needs that the company had. So I worked with him pretty closely and some of the new team members, and that's where I think my like real tech career, I guess, kind of got its start. Just because it's sometimes pretty hard to move out of those support roles into roles that have, I guess maybe more credential and weight when it comes to looking around, doing job interviews and stuff like that for data engineering roles. I think you can get a little more cred from that title sometimes than support roles, just because it's hard to make that transition. And I got lucky being able to do that internally first.
Well, and I mean, I think it's the proof is in the numbers, right? If you're driven and you're looking to grow your career, you can look at the salaries, right, from
Mm-hmm.
tech positions, and a lot of it has to come with that skill set that's it's needed in the marketplace, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
a scarce resource. So tech. So for folks in the audience here, because I had a similar transition, in that I was a CIS major, but I came in as a web developer and went to data engineer, and for me the process was I begged to get on a couple of projects. I volunteered some time. I learned in my free time that I had to get those skills. So, you're working tech support. Was it something you were actively working with your manager or your leadership to say, hey, I'd like to move more on this
Mm-hmm.
side. I'm volunteering. How did that work?
Yeah, good question. So definitely similar situation for me where um, it was, a lot. It ended up being a lot of extra work, just learning the skills that I needed to do anything in a more data engineering role. Um, so I was already doing a little bit with SQL because part of that support engineering role was going into product databases, doing some research on clients' information and pulling reports for them in a way that the product that they were building currently didn't support. So I kind of had to do some ad hoc investigations there. But in order to move over to the data engineering role, it was even more of the understanding SQL, building out pipelines that supported translating data from one format to another or changing it around, summarizing it. So that was a lot of learning SQL on the side or late nights. Honestly, it was a pretty exhausting transition because I was expected to like keep up with all my support engineering work. And then on top of that, start doing some data engineering work, even just to start that transition. So yeah, definitely one of those hard work transitions for sure.
Was it worth it?
I think in the long run, for sure. I mean, it helped jumpstart a lot of my tech career. And I had a really great time with my data engineering manager, Yevgeny Meyer, who's, I guess I'll give a shout out here, who's an amazing data scientist. I think currently he's at a company called Guru, if I remember correctly. And he was, just incredible, helping me learn, doing my constantly tearing apart my SQL pull requests for the new data engineering jobs, and also just very very helpful into what I needed to learn and helping me get those skills. So yeah.
Oh, perfect. And that's I see it all the time, and I see it even in the small projects that I'm able to work on, or when helping folks. Is there's no guarantees in life, but taking a gamble with something that you know while your time is not a renewable resource, it's really time that you're spent learning that, hey, if this technology goes away or this doesn't work out, you can take that and transition it to other aspects of technology. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important for folks to kind of hear that story. And I can't believe we're maybe 5 minutes into this interview, and that's a story I didn't know. And it's like, man, I think it's important, and I would have loved to have seen this when I was in college, or I did a career transition later in life, went back to school. I think knowing these stories out there can really paint the picture and give folks hope. So let me transition into a lead cloud architect. So what does a cloud architect do? What's a day in the life look like?
Yeah. So I think when you're looking at that title, it really depends on where somebody is working. Because cloud is a massive space, right? There's a
I've
lot of
never
different
heard of it.
services. There's a lot of different services. There's a million different platforms and services and products and integrations. And depending on where you are, the role might differ pretty substantially. Right now, I'm in a company that does a lot of IoT, Internet of Things devices, write software for the devices that our clients might use in the field, and potentially integrations with those devices between the device and the cloud itself. And so my role is kind of at that intersection of the device and the cloud. We have a bunch of great hardware engineers, operating system engineers who are writing a lot of the code on the actual devices, and I kind of help them do the bridging between, okay, how are we going to get this device authenticated to the cloud? How are we going to make sure that it can, renew its certificates? How are we going to make sure that it can send information to the cloud? What happens once that data gets into the cloud? How are we going to process it and parse it and store it and deal with the interactions between the cloud and the device and the device and the cloud? So I deal with a lot of those kind of moving pieces. But if you were like a web development company or something else, you might have a completely different experience, right? It might be completely focused on the services that help you get your websites up or your CRUD operations going with whatever app you're working at or a mobile device you're working at or something. But there's a lot of breadth there, and I've had some of those other experiences, but in this current role, it's definitely IoT focused.
So I think earlier this year we had Derek Morgan on. You remember our friend from Linux Academy, and he's in the IoT space. So let me ask a couple of IoT questions. So security, like why is security? Why is, what's your take on the current state of security and IoT?
Yeah. I mean, great question, right? There's a lot of questionable decisions from questionable products out there. Fortunately for me, I work at probably one of the most well-respected vendors in kind of the space that we work in, and so we have the luxury to choose projects that we can feel good about and feel proud of, and that means that we do put a lot of focus onto the securing of devices that we're working with, and that goes everything from the cloud level to the connection between the device and the cloud to the actual software running on the device, making sure that the hardware even on the device is going to be harder to access. So a ton of the like full spectrum of security things for those devices. The largest state of the world is I'd say is probably less in that camp, unfortunately, because there's a lot of companies that want to make cheap products quickly, and usually to them that means cutting out important pieces and steps that secure those products. But I'm glad I can avoid that.
Yeah, no, and I think it's a challenge too, and my background coming, I worked as a software engineer in the public sector. And especially one of the things we always said is if you're trying to protect everything, you're really protecting nothing, right? And if you look at IoT, I mean, we're talking about billions of different devices, right? Like it's a huge challenge, and I guess I shouldn't say I think, because I'm not as much in that space, but my hope is that we will get there, right? As technologists, we continue to push and solve problems, and those are the things that we go after. So, kind of in that specific realm, are there certain technologies that you're really interested in right now that you're, if somebody's out there in the audience looking at this and like, man, I'm excited about, IoT, or I'm excited about cloud architect. What specific technologies would you recommend for them to start looking at and playing with?
Yeah, great question. I actually I just answered some reader questions related to this on my blog that I can send you later. But questions coming in about both how to get started in IoT, but also how to start securing devices and what are the good services to look at. I wrote two pretty full-fledged guides on two services on different cloud providers that I think are good starting points for that. In AWS, the kind of starting point is AWS IoT Core, which handles a lot of the dealing with getting the secure connections between devices in the cloud, figuring out what permissions they have inside AWS to access particular AWS resources. For example, if they need to send information to a database inside of AWS, or they need to access some service somewhere, or you need to create rules to trigger on different pieces of information flowing in through the devices to the cloud. All that sort of configuration happens in AWS IoT Core. And they have a ton of other services related to their IoT devices, but that's kind of one of the key starting points there. And then in Azure, there's Azure IoT hubs, which are pretty much a similar service for Azure and any devices you're working with there, where you're going to be able to register those devices inside of Azure either manually or automatically, depending on how your manufacturing process goes. And then once they're in there and they're registered, they can communicate potentially back and forth between the cloud and the device and take actions, and you can run commands on them. There's a bunch of great stuff you can do. And then there's kind of like one other piece that works both with both in the Azure and the AWS realm, which is how you kind of get that set up for those devices going in the first place. So say you have, 1,000 IoT devices coming out of manufacturing somewhere in the world where you're manufacturing devices. Well, you need to be able to have those from their fresh state to interact with your cloud and connect to everything that you built. And to do that, you have to figure out, are you going to have X509 certificates that you provision on the devices? Are these certificates going to have special chips that have their own unique identities kind of included inside of these chips that allow them to connect to the cloud? There's a few different considerations to make there, but both platforms support being able to securely connect using those kind of more advanced and secure methods of authentication. Yeah.
So let me kind of help me out
Mm-hmm.
a little bit with this. We're trying to think. So I know in the big data space, there's a debate, right? And I mean, and the debate goes back to, open source versus proprietary, all the way back in other fields. But I'm seeing it a good bit in big data and analytics, where do customers use the native tools specifically within AWS or Azure or GCP, or do they use a framework that can provide them portability?
Mm-hmm.
Are you seeing that much with, because I've looked into
Yeah.
some of these tools, but if a customer builds and they work on a project and it's all IoT or AWS IoT, but if they have a change in policy or something happens where they want to shift to Azure,
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming like when I've looked at like HD Insights versus AWS EMR, that it's
Mm-hmm.
hey, we've got to build from the ground up. There's no kind of export. So is that a
Yeah.
concern in IoT, or is it, hey, these tools are so good we couldn't put Kubernetes on top of this and build it ourselves and just run it?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think that's a larger general question that people ask pretty frequently about their infrastructure is, do I use managed services? Do I use cloud services and get the benefits that they're offering in terms of, not having to develop a lot of things ourselves? Do I try and do more work ourselves so we can decide where it lives later on? I'm kind of biased coming from the serverless world and a lot of those things, where I see a lot of the benefits of using managed services in terms of
Yeah.
total cost of ownership, where you think about, okay, what's the real cost of everything that you're doing? Well, a lot of it is developer time. It's not just compute cost. And if you think about that, do I want to spend $1 million getting $1 million on developers, getting up my Kubernetes infrastructure running, getting everything going there, just in terms of the experience? Because if you think about it, the number of people, I mean, maybe Kubernetes has become a lot easier since the last time I checked, but if you want to get a production level infrastructure running, you're going to spend a lot on people to get it going. And the idea, at least behind the kind of managed services realm, is, well, okay, well, we don't have to take all of this infrastructure experience and leverage it just to build our to-do app. Instead, we can jump right in and get it going with a little bit less overhead in terms of infrastructure. I think that applies pretty similarly to IoT, with maybe one more caveat, that once you deploy your devices into the field, you have to have a really good story for updating the software on those if you plan to do any sort of migration. Because if you think about it, a lot of those devices are going to be given variables and configurations and applications that are all going to be pointing towards some piece of infrastructure. And if you want to change it in the long run, you have to be really careful that you're doing it correctly, or else you end up bricking, all of your devices. So that sort of massive migration is something that, makes me pretty hesitant, especially in the IoT space. It's definitely possible, but you really have to think about it thoroughly before you embark on that and have a set of benefits that you're going to get out of it first.
Yeah, I mean, that's changing code in production to the largest scale, right?
Yep,
You've got a
exactly.
risk here to brick all these devices.
Yeah.
So with these with IoT devices and just in kind of your role, and I mean outside of your role, right? Like what you're seeing there. What are some of the biggest challenges around data and IoT devices that you've kind of encountered or you see as a trend?
Yeah, yeah, good question. A lot of different things I think will come up depending on the projects you're working on. Um, Depending on the scale, I mean, just thinking about how you're going to handle when you're talking about big data. One of the biggest drivers of big data is IoT, because you can have thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of devices all sending telemetry information, all sending updates to their state, sending commands back and forth, and all of that being generated um, pretty quickly and thoroughly with a lot of data. And figuring out how you're going to store that, which pieces of data you're going to keep, how you're going to throw it out when it's irrelevant. Those sorts of problems I think are usually one of the initial ones, because you have to start thinking about, well, it's not just the cost of sending it, it's the cost of storing it and keeping it around. And there's a few different avenues that people like to solve those problems. One of the first ones that I think of is just trying to figure out what you can throw away, like what the worthless data is. You shouldn't have big data for no reason, in my opinion. You should be trying to collect the data that you think is actionable and useful. And in a lot of cases, especially with kind of larger amounts of data and types of data like video, photos, those sorts of things. A lot of the time will be processed locally on edge devices if that's possible, so that you can avoid sending terabytes of information from your devices into your cloud and then paying to store that. But once it does get into the cloud and once you are figuring out a way to store it, I think the next challenge that I see people looking at is, how do we optimize this storage? Because a lot of people don't realize how many good options there are for really creating like a tiered setup of different storage warmths. And Azure and AWS each have their own storage tiers. In Azure, I believe the kind of way they discuss it is different, like cold, hot, warm, different storages, so that you can say you can access it immediately. It's a little bit more expensive to store it there. Other of the classes might take a little bit longer, but they're a lot cheaper. And so it's kind of archival storage in AWS or Amazon Glacier or Deep Archive. They'll come up with new names every time, just so that you can, spend an extra few days needing to get it back out, but you still have it there for a little cheaper.
Yeah, no, I mean that life cycle policy I see, just kind of
Hmm.
across the board from what I've seen, customers on prem, customers in the cloud, hybrid, everything. So walking back from, I'm kind of lost here. I thought I had another question that I was wanting to ask around IoT. But I guess I'm gonna move the topic a little bit now instead. So your career, like I said, before we even kicked off and recorded here, I kind of explained it. My thought is I think you've done a great job, just and I know you, but the audience doesn't, with your career and just the ability to move, build your brand around it and have opportunities. And so what I mean, let me back up. What made you decide to, and I don't know if you start a blog before you started doing courses, but what made you start, hey, I'm gonna build a blog, or I'm gonna do a Pluralsight course or anything like that? What was driver there?
Yeah, great question. So I think before I started making courses, I had my blog, and I would just write what my, latest discoveries were. There's some very old posts from my like college days that I've deleted since then, that I just didn't think were like good representations of my knowledge now. And those were like, hey, I'm using WordPress for the first time, and
Yeah.
here's my thoughts on some like new app or something. But eventually I started getting into more technical work, learning SQL, learning Python, doing other things like that, and I just started archiving and collecting posts of what I'd been learning, right? And to this day, I think one of my most popular posts is a post on Redshift timestamps and epochs and conversions between the epoch value and a timestamp and other date formats. And for whatever reason, when I was doing these conversions at my job as a data engineer at Curate, I was like, okay, these are kind of hard to remember. I'm going to go ahead and put these down so I can reference these later. And I wrote a blog post about it. And that's one of my most popular blog posts for the last, like 4 or 5 years, because everybody who's getting, started with Redshift is like, how do I do these conversions? Redshift has its own kind of unique PostgreSQL variant. Like, it's not identical to PostgreSQL, or it's not exactly SQL. So how do I do these conversions that I need to do? And so they find my posts and look at it. But I think that's kind of how it started, was documenting my own knowledge, and then realizing that Pluralsight in this case would pay me to make a course on Lambda, or to make a course on the serverless framework or something. That kind of led to me just realizing I could make more of a living off of that. Yeah.
Do you feel like the blogging, Pluralsight, I mean, doing interviews like this, do you think that helps your career and your I hate to use brands. People shy away from it, but if you think about it, I mean, it's when you go into any interview, or you're looking for you're the next greatest role, there is some brand awareness to you. It doesn't, I mean, I'm not saying be inauthentic, but I mean,
Oh yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I think if I think back to any of my roles past Curate, so Curate was my kind of first entry role. I had just come from IT. I didn't really have a blog that they would care about. It was just some college kid's blog. But after being there for a few, no, not very many people. Maybe my parents. That's about it. But then coming off of actually having posts written in there, while I was working at Curate, that gave me enough cred to, Pluralsight was like, okay, yeah, we can let this guy make a course. And then, my Pluralsight course led to eventually another job offer where we met. They're like, we've seen your Pluralsight course, we've seen your blog, like, we want you to work here making more content. That led to a good opportunity there for a little while. And then same thing with all my other jobs since then. Solutions architect at Serverless Inc. That's again probably a lot of cred for making a course on serverless for Pluralsight, from writing a lot of tutorials, and actually writing articles for Serverless Inc. before I worked there. So and even in the role that I'm in right now, I think it came up during my interview that I'd made a bunch of these courses, that I had that I'd written a bunch of articles and kind of artifacts of my technical knowledge and teaching people. And that was, going to be a piece of my role here, is helping people with, their cloud work, and making sure that I can point them to certain resources that might be more beneficial to them. So yeah, it's definitely helped.
Yeah. I've realized for me, because, last year, just some challenges, some things going on, and I didn't blog as much. And it's not even so much about blogging sometimes for me. It's about, if I just write things out, it helps me kind of formulate and understand kind of what I'm trying to accomplish, or what my thoughts are on, a technology, or, it could be just a meeting. So I do try to do that, but I have noticed, and I don't know if it's just been over the last couple of years, but I think it was before some of the travel restrictions happened here in the U.S. But did I see that you were starting to do public speaking and running some meetups and maybe training sessions, or what's
yeah. I definitely did. There was a little while I was doing some kind of freelance work, and I did a lot more speaking then. Also, while I was at Serverless, my role was kind of a hybrid between developer evangelism, doing client calls and product education and pre-sales work, and like more engineering related work. But during that role, I went to a bunch of conferences. Remember being in San Francisco, or in Oakland actually, during the like initial days of the like pre-pandemic warnings, and being like, okay, maybe it's time to head home, like, and hunker down for a little while and just hang out at home. But that I was also doing some like workshops and trainings and stuff around then. I've still been thinking about doing that, but I don't have quite as much time to do that right now. I'm focused on writing a book, and then after that's done, then I'll be maybe going back to trainings.
can you share? You don't have to share the titles or anything, but is it tech
Yeah.
related or is
Yeah,
it
no, it definitely is. It's
cool?
called it's going to be called the Serverless Cookbook, and it's going to be a bunch of kind of projects and recipes around serverless applications to get people kind of jump started with any of their common situations. So things like, just basic everything from basic CRUD APIs to search to payment integrations to authentication. I'm just trying to have a bunch of different examples in there that people can go, okay, you know what, I need this thing. Let's go ahead and see how I can implement this on the back end and the front end, and get everything tied up and working just off the bat, and then they can go from there and make their own app a little bit more easily. So that's kind of my goal right now with the
Wow,
book.
it's interesting. So I guess writing is something something you've kept, So
Sure,
I didn't
yeah, I
know
just
I didn't even know
haven't
you
been
were.
doing as haven't been doing as many blog posts, but behind the scenes I've been slowly adding chapters. So
So when you do something like that, and I've seen a couple of your blogs, but I mean,
Mhm.
honestly, haven't checked it out in
Yeah.
probably a year or so. But I know you've done blogs in the past around serverless. Is it, hey, you have some of the framework for some of that and some of the posts, and not saying that I
Yeah.
know that in other sites, I don't know that it always works in IT, but I've seen where other people they have a blog and they've written short stories, right? This is
Mhm.
outside of tech, and they
Yeah.
can kind of put that together, and it seems kind of easy for them. So is that kind of like you're like, hey, I have 10, 20, 30, I don't know how many blog posts
Yeah.
around that, it's I can put together a book on that.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's definitely a piece of that. There's going to be a lot of editing and kind of moving it in integration for me, but I do already have, I had in between jobs while I was doing some more freelancing, I did 20 projects in 20 days series, and I'm going to be
Oh,
incorporating a
I did
lot of
see that.
those. So I
Yeah.
think at least like 10 of those are probably going to make their way into the book. Um, there's going to be a ton of changes to a lot of those projects, but they're going to be a really good starting point. And that's honestly part of why I did that series, was so I could force myself to do all the projects that I knew would go in the book eventually. And with all the changes, they should be pretty useful. I'll be adding a bunch more stuff like the payments integration, the authentication integration, a lot of different languages and runtimes that I'll be working with too. So
Man,
yeah.
that's perfect. I'll go ahead and open it up here. But if you want to, when the book releases, if you want to come on, man, we can have you in an interview. We can do a live stream for the audience here if you're ever
Sure.
interested. So just reach
Yeah,
out.
that'd be great. Yeah.
So that's pretty cool, man. So what do you do? I got a couple more questions, and I know we'll wrap up. But
Mhm.
what do you do? And I feel like we may have already answered this, but what do you do to keep learning and kind of honing those skills? I know you're writing books, you write blogs, you do courses, but is there anything you'd like to give as encouragement to folks sitting out there
Yeah.
watching?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I'm definitely still learning. And I
Tech
had
changes.
yeah. I mean, I'll especially in this role, I mean, I'll be given a project with a new, like recently I was given a project with a new language. I was like, okay, got to learn this new language. And so I spent, a few days just taking Pluralsight courses on the new language, getting up to speed on that, kind of figuring out how to use one of the most popular web development frameworks for the language, and then implementing all that knowledge into the actual project. But yeah, I mean, I definitely need to, keep doing that when I'm learning something new. I go back in there and I try and take notes. I think I have, I might still have one of my notebooks here that I took all the notes in, but I would just go through it, try and figure out what the similarities are for what I'm doing, what the similarities are for what somebody else might be doing, and see how I can apply it to the projects that I've got going on.
Do you handwrite notes?
I did for this because it's been so long since I'd really like, it's pretty unusual for me, but
Still do.
nice, nice. But for this, yeah, I was brand new to this language. And so I needed to really dive into it. And I did a bunch of comparisons between like my most common language that I write in, Python, and the new language I was learning, and figuring out the different, the different ways that the package managers worked, and the imports and packaging worked, and all the kind of different discrepancies there that I needed to kind of just set in my brain before I really dug into it.
No, that's awesome. So book coming up. How do folks get in touch with you? What's your preferred
Yeah.
medium? I know you're on the social medias, but what's your
Yeah.
favorite, or how do you want folks to engage with you if they're
Yeah,
interested?
yeah. I mean, they can definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn or Twitter. The easiest way to see what I'm up to, I'll usually post updates on my blog. So that's just fernandomc.com. And I'll post, I'll be posting about the book once it gets closer. If they want to sign up for the book, I actually have a sign up page, but it's not out yet. So I'll be sure to let you know as soon as the book
Yeah.
goes live, or I'm in the process of counting down and have like a published date in mind, so I can force myself to finish by then.
Yeah, perfect, man. We'll make sure, and then for anybody watching this, we it's here in this description for his blog, for Fernando's blog, Twitter, and also I've got a link here in the description for your Pluralsight author page as well too.
Awesome.
So, Fernando, man, it was great catching up, man. Let's not keep it too long, man. This has been good, man. I
Yeah.
learned a ton, took a ton of notes here, so I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah,
It's been great.
it's great to talk to you. Good to talk to you again. And yeah, looking forward to coming back once the book is written. We'll have more to talk about then.
Perfect, perfect. Well, folks, thanks for joining in today. Make sure you follow Fernando to see what all he's up to. And if you've made it this far in the video, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode of Big Data, Big Questions. Thanks, everyone.